Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Tectonic Lounge. We're coming to you today with Kevin, who is a partner at Boost Labs. Kevin is down in Florida, I believe.
I'm in Atlanta.
Close enough to Florida, Georgia. So, Kevin, welcome. Good to have you here. Tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, hey Serge, thanks for having me. Big fan of what you're doing here. Basically, my background is design. I started Boost Labs with my business partners, and for the last 15 years, we've been focused on data visualization and product development for digital applications.
All right, we're going to get into this and unpack what the heck is data visualization because I'm not sure everybody really knows what that is. But what I appreciate from you is you coming at this from two things that generally in many people's minds don't align together, which is data and visual, or data, and which is pretty straightforward. There's information, there's numbers, and then there's the design part of it. How did you actually come into the place where you're combining those two things?
Actually, my interest in this dates back to when I was in college. I went to SCAD and I took an information design class. There was basically no use of computers in this class. One of the mandatory readings of this class was a book by Edward Tufte called The Visual Display of Quantitative Information. And for anybody who's into data science, that's probably on your bookshelf. Tufte is known as kind of the godfather of data visualization. Yeah, we had some projects, and I noticed a lot of designers around me did not have an interest in data and precision the way that I did. So it just ended up sort of being my career path after that.
Well, sometimes it's great to find your unique niche or your unique differentiator, however you want to call it, and run with it. I think that's a powerful thing to do, especially, in a place like Savannah where there's a ton of artists coming out of that, a ton of designers, so you got to be unique. So let's get off the geek train a little bit and talk to just an average business owner, whether it's a guy who owns a furniture factory or somebody who runs a chain of restaurants or whatever it be. What the heck is data visualization and why should they care that it exists? And then we'll talk about applications.
Yeah, this one it's very easy for people to understand it from the perspective of charts. I'm sure that if you're a business owner like myself, you have had to look at finances for your business, and looking at a bunch of numbers on a spreadsheet, basically humans can't make sense of that. You might be able to stare at the numbers long enough and pick up on what direction the numbers are heading or whether you did better or worse than last year. But you're not going to know, is this an exponential curve? Is it related to other data sets that I have, like how much I'm spending on marketing or advertising? How does this relate to my employee salaries? And so charting all of this visually, even if it's just using charts in Excel, I would call that basic data visualization because it's just putting visuals to the data, because we as humans, we're really good at picking up on patterns, visual patterns. We've just evolved on the plains of Africa to sort of like scan our environment and pick up on any patterns that can frighten us. And, this day and age, that plays into data visualization.
So the example of basic data visualization would be a line graph, a bar graph that you can do in Excel or in Google Sheets and stick it into your PowerPoint for your quarterly report, and that you visualize some data. And as you said, for a lot of business owners, staring at numbers, you can guess things, but when you can put them in a pattern and correlate them to each other, unless, as we talked offline, you're Archimedes or Descartes or one of the brilliant scientists who can just look at numbers and have them draw things in your head. Most of us are not like that, so it definitely helps to see things. So I want to dig in and start talking about the why, because I think why really matters. And you started opening up the door a little bit, so I want to kind of really expand on this. One of the things that you brought up before and I've looked into before is this idea of we live in very siloed data, especially when we get into medium-sized businesses. If you have departments or if you have locations, how can data visualization help you de-silo your data and perhaps solve problems beyond, just looking at the exponential curve or linear curve?
Yeah, that's been an ongoing problem. So for the last 15 years, our agency, Boost Labs, has worked with all sizes of companies. And this is definitely a pattern we've seen. The marketing department has budgets and they will go out and do marketing. The sales department has their numbers. A lot of times, the sales department will do forecasting as well. They need to staff up or staff down depending on their needs. Resourcing or HR departments have their data. And a lot of times, these departments are not talking well together, or they're talking maybe once a month with a PowerPoint presentation. So one of the things that we've been working on for the last 15 years is actually building dashboards where there's a centralized single point of truth data for these departments to all have a resource they can go to. They know what's coming up spending wise and resource wise, and they can plan better.
So why should the marketing people know what the HR people are doing, or why should the HR people know what the sales people are doing?
Yeah, so there's a lot of cycles in businesses. For instance, if you're in the education space, you've obviously got seasons and cycles where you need to staff up or staff down. I mean, I can't think of any businesses that don't at least have some kind of cycle. It might be weekly, it might be monthly, and usually there's annual patterns as well. And so basically, you want to know what these different departments are doing because your whole business is an entity in itself. And so, if marketing is spending a lot and expects to bring in a lot of new customers, but your, say, development department is behind on bug testing, that's a problem. That's going to become a bottleneck for your company in 3 months. Not to mention, there's a lot of different ways to forecast. We'll probably get into forecasting a bit more. But yeah, if you don't have all your data points put together, your forecasting is very limited. It's like trying to see what's in front of you with one eye closed.
Right. And I think you gave a great example, because just because a department store, or other stores that deal with seasonal things like Christmas or Thanksgiving shopping, Black Friday, they know they got to scale up. But is this year going on pace compared to last year, 3 years? What are the industry trends overall? Do I need to hire 10 extra people, 12 extra people, or 8 extra people? And that's a significant decision, because that's a lot of work for HR. That's a lot of work for training and everything else. And if you can actually have better analysis and look at multiple points of data and understand, okay, our pipeline is really heavy and we have a lot of things coming in, and then there's a lot of new products and the marketing has done a great job and there's a lot of more response to sales ads, then we maybe need to staff up a little bit more, or vice versa.
Yeah, and in retail, you've also got like supply and inventory to worry about. That's also a big influence on what's going on.
Right, because if we get back to, I'm going to date myself. I still remember when Tickle Me Elmo was the thing. They couldn't keep them on the shelves, right? And who would have expected that? And if you could have forecasted that, maybe you could have, hired extra people or planned other events, try to find other toys or whatever it may be. Okay, so you brought up forecasting. The way I understand it, and I'm not a data scientist. I don't even play one on TV. But we really do have two types of data, right? We have the data that we know has happened, right? That's our, existing data pieces. And we can analyze what has happened in the past. It's backwards facing data, looking at the past, seeing things that we know have happened, right? Hey, we spend this much money, this is how much came in, or, this is what our sales went up or down. And then we also try to do things in the future. How do most business owners do it, in your opinion? How do they forecast?
Yeah, so first, let me just pick apart that first part. Your rear facing data, the things you quote know happened, even in that data, there's usually some data cleaning involved because the data could be bad. And so before you even start forecasting, the first step is really make sure that your data is good. Your rear facing data is actually accurate to what happened. The accounting department isn't on a 3-month lag and you actually know what happened 3 months ago or what's happening last week or whatever. So once that data is cleaned and good to go, most business owners do what I would call linear function, just a linear trend based on what the data is showing you over some arbitrary time period, right? Like you could look at the last 12 days of how your business is doing and do a linear progression and just model what it's going to be on Sunday based on how it's done over the last 12 days. But obviously that's very imperfect. To be a little more sophisticated, you want to include as far back as you can. Multiple years is best because then you can pick up on annual trends at your business. And also, wow, a big one is knowing what day of the week your data is. That's a whole thing that I've had to deal with. I have some fun stories to tell if we get into that. But you want to know what those patterns are because simply doing a linear forecast is going to be very inaccurate.
Yeah, I think you get into days of the week or even hours of the day when you start zooming in. But if you're trying to look at year-long trends, maybe, Tuesdays don't matter as much as months matter or quarters matter. I was actually thinking you're giving a little too much credit to some business owners, because I think in many cases, the forecasting is what I would say a gut feeling, right? Where they're just like, I think we'll have more sales next month. Oh, I think it's going to slow down next month. And it's not necessarily based on a linear or even a model or anything else.
And if you don't visualize it, you can't even base it on instinct. I'm a numbers guy and I can't look at 12 numbers and tell you what kind of pattern it is. You really have to see them visually.
So we're talking about this, and you mentioned data cleaning. Is there ever a situation where you actually have too much data, where like the data is starting to overwhelm you, and you need to narrow things down and narrow your scope? And how do you remove biases from these kind of things?
Oh man, okay. This is going to be a bit of a tangent, but I'm a bit of a physics nerd. And in physics, there is this concept of emergence. And so emergence is something like this. If you want to plot the Earth's, say, going around the sun, right? You treat the Earth as one data point, and it has this velocity in this direction, and it has this much mass. And for your math purposes, it's one data point, right? But the Earth isn't one data point. It's actually like 10 to the 50 power of atoms, all interacting with each other in the gravitational force of the Earth. But it would make no sense to build your math out to like look at those 10 to the 50th power atoms of the Earth and plot all of their velocities, right? So you got to simplify things down. Anyway, that's the concept of emergence. And that also plays into business. If you're constantly looking at what every customer is doing, how much they spend on every item, and at what time, you won't make much sense of that at all. So you need systems that simplify the data and basically simplify it to simple math equations that anybody can look at, a single line chart to see the trends.
It sounds a little overwhelming. I think as a business owner myself, in many cases, I think simpler is better. But yes, you're right. When you start drilling down too much, you get into the weeds, and I think sometimes you lose the forest for the trees. And I think that's a scary proposition. Let's scare the business people a little bit more, and then I kind of want to pull back a little bit and give them some breathing room. But you mentioned on our pre-recording call the idea of comparison and being able to compare data, and you actually were talking about some of your work with the Census Bureau and having to opportunity with that. So let's kind of dig into that a little bit.
This might be a controversial statement, but I actually think all data visualization has to involve comparison, because if, say, I have one data point, my business made, let's say, $1.5 million last year, and that's like one number, and I put it out there. That, without context, that doesn't tell me if the business is doing well. Is that above or below what was happening last year? Is that, just revenue, or is that profit? And so basically, to make sense of any data, you really need at least two data points, and you need to show the relationship between them to tell a story. So yeah, my example with Census Bureau is an interesting one. They contracted us to come in and build a tool that would display the census data, and they get all sorts of data about demographics, family makeup, education, income. It's broken down to the census block, which is smaller than a county, and it's not identifiable to the individual. So it's basically like, think of it as neighborhood blocks of data. And it's helpful to break that data up into these demographic groups, age groups, education groups, income groups, etc. But that still doesn't tell a state how things are going, what kind of trends and patterns are happening at the macro level, until you compare different states. And that's where things get interesting. So we built something called the State Comparison Tool, and it was longitudinal data across all of the states of America. And it allowed certain states to see how maybe their spending on road infrastructure spurred more jobs in this industry. And by putting that kind of data together and comparing against other states who have different spending patterns, education spending, infrastructure spending, then they could make conclusions about what they should do with maybe they should change the tax model for their state to spur growth, or maybe they should increase spending on education because the data is telling them.
So it seems a little bit more, I don't know, logical or simpler of a model in my head. How does somebody compare business data? Right. Obviously, you can't call up all your competitors and say, "Hey, can you give me your data?" Right. It'd be great, if I own a McDonald's, I'm not going to call up Burger King and Taco Bell and Chick-fil-A and say, "Hey, can I see all your numbers?" Pretty sure that's not going to happen. How do you compare business data? How do you kind of make those decisions that you just gave an example of in a business?
Yeah, that is an excellent question. And the answer might fall short for some people. But the reality is, you got to look at all your data first, right? And so I would encourage people to not just look at what they spent and how much they made in revenue, but also try to quantify other outcomes. For instance, we did a project for the USAID. And the USAID is a government agency that spends about $10 billion in aid worldwide. That's less than 1% of the US government budget, but it's a lot of money. And we came along and we built this tool for them called Dollars to Results. And that did exactly as the name implies. It put how much dollars are spent in each of these countries and what were the results. The results had to be quantified in order to make sense of it, but they were things like how much more acreage of agriculture were added on, how many people were fed with this money, what's how much in billions of dollars of infrastructure, we were able to come in and build as, the American aid apparatus. So that's the first step. I would say look at the results that might be more than revenue, because you got employees, you've got inventory, you probably have square footage if you have a physical location. So look at some of those other data points and bring those in so that you can look at patterns overall.
Yeah, and I think definition of success matters in every way possible, right? Because you have to define it for your business, you have to define it for even your departments, right? How do you define success? So when you're measuring inputs, then you actually are not just saying, well, did we have a good year, right? Like at SCAD, obviously they're art school, but they also look at numbers for recruiting and retention. But was it a good year? Well, what is the student satisfaction, right? How do you measure student satisfaction? So I think there's a lot of little things that you can do that would definitely make a difference there. So if a business wants to get into data visualization, what are like 2 or 3 things they need to start with? They have the clean data, you mentioned that. Do they just start dumping it into spreadsheets and building pivot tables? Do they start coming up with graphs? Do they bring in an expert? Do they hire a consultant? Do they take a YouTube class? What do they do to actually start with this?
I guess it depends on the business owner. If you're a business owner who's into numbers and your hobby is accounting for your business, then absolutely get started with some data visualizations on your own. And there's some principles I can outline for you there. Basically, what Tufty says is you want to keep things simple. He has this term called chart junk. So, you build your chart, you basically don't want to include unnecessary gradients, unnecessary 3D protrusions of your data that aren't lending value. Get rid of any unnecessary tick marks. Make sure you're building your scale from 0 to whatever number, so you're not overemphasizing certain data, and start there. If you're not into data, or you have maybe your 20 plus business, and you're getting a little more sophisticated, you're not on your own anymore, then I would probably start with someone who's got some math background in maybe the marketing department or advertising or sales or accounting, and have them get started with something that's, again, simple. Just look at backwards facing data for right now. Look at what your business has done for the last 5 years and see if you can pick up on some patterns there. Now, if you're a 50 plus business and you've been in business for over 5 years, you're a little more stable, then at that point, I would recommend hiring a professional. This person probably goes by the title of data analyst, and that's a good place to start. And the data analyst is going to be, probably more versed than me in a lot of the data science of how to do this. And then I would say, if you're building digital products for your customers, and data and, let me say, design is a really big part of your business because you're putting your best foot forward and being very design forward, then you might look at someone like me who's a data designer.
So I think there's a beautiful thing. We actually just recently launched an episode with another guest where we talk about fractional work. And I think bringing in a fractional data scientist and an analyst would be a great thing. So I want to dig into this data designer, because that is not the most common job title. I don't see the Georgia Convention Center there in Atlanta full of data designers. I know I have some guesses, but I want you to tell me, how is data impacting design, or how should data be impacting design?
Yeah, so I don't necessarily recommend that everybody take this path, but it works for me because I'm a very tedious perfectionist. And again, I started with design. So my background is design. So I came at this whole thing from the perspective of what design can do for business, that it makes people's lives better. It's also a good first impression for a business. I mean, everything you do in business, if you're a business owner, you're trying to portray yourself as someone that other people want to do business with. And the same should go for everything your business puts out. If it's a sign on your door, if it's a flyer, if it's an advertisement, if it's a commercial, If it's a webinar like this, you're going to wear your best shirt and comb your hair, right? Not me, but you. So you want to put your best foot forward. You want to include design in everything your business does. The biggest thing I would say non-designers, which I hate the term non-designers because I think everyone can design, but the biggest thing that people who aren't into design maybe don't get is design is about simplifying. It's not about adding prettiness. It's really about simplifying things down to their essential message and communicating things ultra clearly visually. Once you get that down, you can start to expand and include more message. But it starts with that. It starts with simplifying.
And I think it goes back to the way I think about more advanced design. When you were talking earlier about product design, is you're obviously going to have to know your audience, right? And I think understanding how your audience already behaves on the website. You and I talked about, we worked together on a project where you guys did an audit of a particular product online. And not only do you have conversations with people, right? Like, what do you find comfortable? What do you not find comfortable? But you also collected that data to be able to make a decision. Okay, it seems like 80% of the people interviewed or a large percentage of your users seems to not be able to find function X. Perhaps we should find a way to highlight that in our design. Or it seems like this function is not being used at all. Is it because it's not a useful function, or it's hard to get to, or it's hard to use? Then business owner can make choices like, do we need to provide more training? Do we need to simplify the function? Do we need to create a new function that replaces it? And all that varies depending on your application. But I think ultimately, smart design, you said it very well. It's not just making things look pretty, but it's communicating. And it does come down to usability as well on many levels, is being able to allow people to use your product well, because that's how you're going to make money at the end of the day, right? Because if people don't use your product, they're not going to renew, or they're not going to bring more users on, or whatever it may be, or they're going to find a competitor to go if it's going to be a lot easier. I think that's a powerful thing.
An example I use a lot around the office is the dishwasher. If I go buy a dishwasher and it has more than, let's say, 7 buttons, I don't see a need for that. I don't want a dishwasher that has a Wi-Fi connection, and will wash my clothes. I just want a dishwasher with 3 buttons, right? Normal, maybe like extreme wash, dry button, and like a cancel button, maybe 3 to 5 buttons max. So yeah, simplicity is really important, especially if you want people to return to your product frequently and use it as part of their routine. Don't build your dishwasher with 100 buttons.
I'll give you an even more simple option, not just washing by hand, but probably the most used simple kitchen device I have that plugs into the wall is a rice cooker. And I purposely went out of the way to buy an authentic, the one that we used in China when I lived there. And I think we've had the same model or same type model. It has one button. It's on, that's it. Because all it needs to do is get my rice perfectly cooked. And you can do other things with it, but it has a button. You plug it in, press a button. When it reaches the temperature that it does, it's very simple magnet, and the water boils and the weight changes. Done, button pops, my rice is done. And as much as I don't really care for unitaskers in life, but it's a powerful example. This model works so well, but I tried looking at those Instapots and everything else, and it's like, there's 25 different modes of cooking food. Come on, just,
Right.
just cook my rice. Just keep it simple sometimes.
Yeah, and the interesting thing that happens with that one button is you get a sort of loyalty to that product, and you have the trust that every time you press that button, it's going to work. It's going to work. And the day that it doesn't work, you're going to throw that thing out and you're going to buy the same model again because you've been trained as the user to use that one button.
Well, I mean, and it is less likely to break when you have 25 different modes. There's more things that can go wrong sometimes. So simple design sometimes is best longevity for design. All right. Well, we're in 2024, so I cannot avoid asking this because, it is the greatest hope and fear of most people in tech today. When it comes to data visualization, couldn't you just throw it all in, I don't know, OpenAI, ChatGPT, whichever tool you choose to, Gemini, whatever, and it magically does it all for you?
So there's a couple concerns with that. Number one is you probably don't want to just give your data away to the AI community yet. There are ways to have closed systems and have AI running on a server at your location and do that. And I'm actually exploring that right now at our business. We're doing that for customers. But yeah, I wouldn't recommend that anybody just hand all your data over to OpenAI just yet. The other thing is it's not quite there yet, if I'm honest. The tools that I've used, the GPTs that I've used that connect to those large language libraries, They're not quite there. It's 2024. We're talking in September. I would say probably in the next 6 months. Then yes, this will probably become a very big tool to use, and I fully embrace that and encourage it. Tufte's book came out in the 80s before there was even personal computers, really, and everything he talked about as far as simplifying and only including the necessary data, not lying to your user with the data, making sure that you're telling a truthful data story with as little data as you need to tell that story. That holds as true today as ever. And I see a trend where user interface is getting simpler as well. When the mouse was invented, all of a sudden we were interfacing with a screen and a mouse, and we could move this thing around an XY axis. And we didn't have to type in every command into our prompts. And that sure as heck improved things. But it's been that way for 35 years. We've been using a mouse. And so now with AI, now we can start to interact with our computers verbally. And so I think it's a whole new ball game. I'm very excited for it. And I think that once we get past this learning phase, we will end up with some really cool data visualization tools that will be driven by AI.
So the exciting part that could happen 6 months, 18 months down the road is you can basically have a private GPT or a private AI model, or you can pay into a private model. In fact, the episode that's launching, I believe today, or may have launched today, we talk about some legal challenges with using AI with customer data. So anybody who's into AI, please watch an interview with a wonderful attorney from Canada who dives deep into some of the risks you have from legal issues, including passing on the risk to your customers and passing on warnings and so on and so forth. Other than that, having whether it's a private GPT or a cloud one that's specifically designed for that, but even the thing you mentioned earlier, finding somebody in the marketing department who understands numbers, their job will be easier because they can present it and see different ways to present it until it makes sense. This is what I like about the AI environment in general. It allows you to have that creativity sandbox, right? I still want to have the human review at the end, but allows me to play around and say, gee, I wonder if I add this set of data, does that make more sense? Is that the story that really makes a difference for my business? And then ultimately just the visual outputs, they can have models. And I will tell you, I've noticed difference in the way people build charts in US and Vietnam and Europe. There's certain styles and certain ways of the way charts look and graphs look that are vary by culture even. So I think that's quite interesting to see how these models adjust even culturally to that. All right, so I promised to let you brag and get people excited about the kind of cool stuff you're doing in your sandbox. So you said you're working on a really exciting project that will change the world in a way. So tell me more.
Overall, we're in a transitional period right now. People are still using a mouse, and we are on these legacy systems that have been built by businesses where users everywhere have to use the mouse to interact, or your mobile device, right? I know there was a very, very long transitional period to mobile. Now, I think most product teams are mobile first because people are on the mobile devices more than their desktops. But still, you're using your fingers, you're tapping, you're not interacting with your voice. You're certainly not interacting with your thoughts directly, which is where I think we will eventually head. But for right now, we're in a transitional period. And what we're focused on at Boost Labs, and I've especially been interested in over the last year, is to transition these digital products from a point and click mouse to something where you can prompt and it will tell you an outcome and give you supporting evidence for that outcome. For instance, I have a dream of a product where you will just say as a business owner, what's our revenue going to be in February? And the system will give you that answer, and it will give you supporting data and visualizations to support that answer. And it will probably give you some sort of a confidence score or a range, of where it thinks it might be, or a normalized distribution model of where it thinks that revenue in February will be. But the point is, I don't think that we will need to all become data scientists and learn how to read the data. We will just need to know how to use these tools that are coming out, or I'm going to make sure they're coming out because I'm working on them. That's the dream.
Yeah, I think the idea of where the system gives me a range of outcomes and then I can say, well, what if we change X, right? So taking your follow, okay, what if we launch a new product in February instead of March? Would that change
That's
our sales
exactly.
significantly, right? Or is that going to be too expensive for us with marketing and that's going to kill our bottom line? I think there's a lot of numbers I look at when it comes to businesses that slight shifts can impact decisions, right? So I think being able to play around with that without having to build complicated formulas or using, BI applications, which some of us love, but, not everybody dives into them. If you can actually prompt that, and, I'm not quite ready for computer to read my mind because that could get a little scary at times. But I like the idea of voice prompting or text prompting or even click prompting. Like, okay, well, I don't like this thing. What can I do to change this thing right there? Or, why do we have a risk factor right here? Or I even hope that one day we can ask our data GPT, what data points am I missing that would make an impact on this, right? What other departments I should be consulting with? Because again, I think it's a continual learning thing. And hopefully, as the system gets better, it will prompt us, hey, you want to really plug in your HR data because your HR already surveyed employee satisfaction. And if you can boost your employee morale, your productivity increases by 10%. You don't have that backlog of bugs anymore, and so on and so forth.
And one of the opportunities there as well is as these systems get better, they will actually be able to fill in where data is incomplete or data is bad and perform data cleaning itself because it will have trained on enough examples over time that it will learn from the process.
And hopefully we'll get accurate with that as well. As we wrap up, I give every guest an opportunity to share something that makes their life better or the way they're trying to impact the world. So if this is kind of your final word here.
Wow, I haven't thought about that. I'm big on design and I'm big on usability. But for my kids who are going to school right now, I just want them to understand that there's this concept of cognitive load theory where people get overwhelmed very easily. And as our society progresses and mobile devices and AI and all of this, it's just going to get more and more like that. And some people look at that as an evil direction that the world is heading, but I think it's an opportunity to understand that science and basically focus on making things simple for people. A long time ago, we all used to hand wash our clothes on the washboard, and we don't do that anymore. That's a cognitive load we took off of our system, at least in the Western world. And I spend 0 minutes per day thinking about or committing myself to washing my clothes on that washboard. And so as AI and technology improves, we're going to take more and more cognitive load from ourselves away from these tasks that we're doing and we're used to doing now. But that's only going to be a good thing because it'll allow us to have more creativity, invent new things, and progress society.
You're right. If we were still living in a cave trying to think of a way to protect her from the saber-toothed tiger, we would not be inventing AI stuff. I think that's a very true.
I like to go on a vacation where I do that once a month, maybe, but yeah, I don't want to do it every day.
I'm not sure I want to go on vacation where I have to deal with saber-toothed tigers, but
No, I'd want a cage.
yes, in a cage. There you go. Well, everybody, thank you again for listening to Tectonic Lounge. Please tune in to other episodes. Catch up on the ones you may have missed. We have a lot of conversations that do go into AI, including some of the ethics and legal issues of AI. There's an episode where we demystify some of the history and terminology of AI. But we also are talking to people in different business areas to see how technology is solving problems, which is ultimately what all businesses should be doing. And if your business is growing and you guys need to get into data design, we'll be happy to connect you with Kevin. The link to his website will be in the show notes. And obviously, we at Code Engine Studio will be happy to help you with any of your web development needs and sometimes call Kevin for help when we need to with design and stuff. So thank you again, everybody, for listening. Have a great day.
Thank you, Serge. Love what you're doing.